Welcome to Author Stories, the podcast where we talk to the best writers in the industry and discuss writing and the creative process. Whether you're a writer, a reader, or both, we hope you'll find something here that makes you love books and the writers that create them. You can find archives of all of the great conversations I've had with authors over the years at hankgarner.com. Take some time and browse around there. I'm sure you'll find a new author to love, find inspiration for your own creative life, and find a new story to get lost in. Let's thank some sponsors who make the show possible. We're so happy to have our friend Crystal Pico Watanabe as a sponsor of the show. Crystal is one of the best editors in the business, and she has just debuted a new service that I think you'll absolutely love and will help you to up your writing game. Pico's School of Wordcraft and Editing has just debuted, and the first course is called Properly Punctuating Dialogue. It's a mini course and can be completed in just about 20 minutes. It covers the basics of dialogue punctuation. Authors can get access to the new school and the course for free by signing up for Crystal's author newsletter, Notes from Pico. Go to picoshouse.com/newsletters. That's PIKKOSHOUSE.com/newsletters. More in-depth courses will be added in 2020. Make sure you don't miss a thing. picoshouse.com/newsletters. Unwilling Souls by Gregory D. Little. Books 1 and 2 are only 99 cents for a limited time. The gods are rightfully imprisoned, and Cess intends to keep them that way. But her terrorist father has other plans. Gregory D. Little's Unwilling Souls is a pulse-pounding chase through an epic fantasy world of adventure, sinister conspiracy, and a magical industrial revolution fueled by harvested human souls. Cess is the daughter of powerful parents who would very much like to kill one another and who therefore pretend she doesn't exist. An apprentice jailer of the gods, Cess spends her days learning to forge the tools needed to maintain the gods' prison. When her terrorist father attacks the prison on her 16th birthday, Cess is forced to flee after the secret of her parentage is revealed. Suddenly on the wrong side of the law, Cess realizes the very father who abandoned her may be the only one who can protect her. But some secrets are darker than parentage. On her way to find her father, Cess will uncover truths about her family and herself that will shatter her understanding of the world and risk the return of the gods themselves. Unwilling Souls and its sequel, Ungrateful God, are on sale now for only 99 cents. The third book of the series is coming early next year, so now is the perfect time to get up to speed. Unwilling Souls by Gregory D. Little. Books 1 and 2, only 99 cents for a limited time. Writers, I have an amazing tool to tell you about. A revolutionary writing tool for planning stories, Campfire Pro is what novelists need to go from the seed of an idea to a detailed plan that's ready to be executed. Complete your character design, create a timeline, and track your world building all in one place with our downloadable desktop app for Mac and PC. Without the annoying subscription model so many apps are using today. Visit campfiretechnology.com for special holiday pricing on Campfire Pro today. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. Today, my guest is Crispin Boyer. I'm super excited to have him on the show. He's got a fantastic new book for middle graders. It's called Zeus the Mighty, The Quest for the Golden Fleas. Book 1. Welcome to the show, Crispin.
Hi, well, thanks for having me on, Hank. I'm happy to be here.
I'm excited to have you. Crispin, we begin each show with the same question, and that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Oh, that's an awesome question, actually. So I guess like most writers, and I was an avid reader when I was young, and I got into, of all things, like my gateway books, oddly enough, was just stuff that my mom had around the house. And she had a lot of Stephen King books. And she also had Arthur C. Clarke science fiction books. And
nice.
Even though the Stephen King books were probably not the most appropriate for a kid to read, they just were so vivid and such exciting stories. And Arthur C. Clarke, his science fiction was so well plotted out. Well, everything made sense. And I remember it was definitely starting with the the Arthur C. Clarke stories, I thought, wow, I'd really like to, and it just made me, it kind of fired my imagination. It made me want to be a writer also. And of course, when you're a kid, you try and write stories, and you get frustrated because you're not, writing is not easy. But I think if you like read enough and if you devote yourself to it enough, then it doesn't necessarily become easier, but you can at least recognize when you're doing okay,
Yeah. That's a really interesting writing pedigree. Stephen King and Arthur C. Clarke. Arthur Clarke, like you said, his great meticulous plotting and planning that just makes it read so effortless. And then Stephen King, who's a notorious non-plotter. That's really interesting that those two, are kind of first and foremost influences. Do you feel either one or both of those influences today in your writing?
Gosh, I guess today in my, as I grew up I really got into science fiction. So then it got more into like Isaac Asimov, and then into fantasy with Tolkien, and also still reading Stephen King, Stephen King, like through his long career, has kind of created a broad universe that's all interconnected, but I don't feel like it necessarily was the path. Whereas these other, like, Isaac Asimov had his Foundation novels and his robots novels, and those created such a epic world where there were rules and things made sense. And that's something that I've always really liked. And the same thing, up through J.K. Rowling and the Harry Potter novels, where she created a world where there are rules, and the world has such established connections and characters and rules that you feel like it's real. And that's really what I connected with, and that's the type of thing that I'm trying to do with this series, is to create a world. And this Zeus, the series that I've just came out with, is my first fiction series. So I've taken a while to get to writing fiction, but it's something I've always wanted to do. Until now, I've always written nonfiction. But yeah, so I think that and I've always been an avid fan of fiction. It's just, as a professional writer, I've always just focused on where, what writing, where the paycheck comes from, and it's just been nonfiction until now, and I got the opportunity to dive into fiction. So kind of the lifetime of being a fan of reading fiction, and these authors I talked about are kind of culminating now in my first foray into fiction.
How did you get started in your writing career? You've been writing nonfiction, but how did you break in?
Well, I went to college, started out as a major in computer science, and I was never very good at math. And sure. And actually, I thought, when I was in college, I was like, I want to be like a pilot. So I thought I'd get more of a technical degree and go to ROTC and go into the Army and get pilot training. And I just was so not good at math, and always had a knack. And this comes back to having encouraging teachers in elementary and high school that would just say, you've got a knack for writing. And then whenever I got to college, I'm like, well, why am I beating myself up taking these math-heavy courses when I could go into, something that at least I have an aptitude for? And that's when I decided, well, okay, that's great, but I also need to make a living. And so I decided to get a degree in journalism. And this was in the early 90s when journalism was maybe a bit more, it seemed like the prospects were brighter. To be a journalist nowadays, it's harder to make a living. But so I got a journalism degree, and I started out interning at newspapers, and my first few jobs were as a staff writer for some daily newspapers out in North Carolina. And that was, I feel like, being a journalist on deadline, that's the real kind of trial by fire. You're writing just, real boilerplate stories, just getting to the facts. But I always enjoyed writing features, and features where I would get to stretch my creative legs a bit, and that would be where I'd get my creative rejuvenation, I guess, from writing. Say I do a week of hard news stories about the local police beat or the county commissioners arguing over where the landfill is going or that kind of stuff. And then I would get to write a feature about something fun, like, a certain personality in the community or, technology and that kind of thing. And then I went from news. Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, just the next step was after that, I got a job as a magazine editor for a video game magazine, a national video game magazine, and that was fun because I got to combine my interests in technology, but also focus on writing fun features about technology. So, the cover stories and trends in video games, and stories about players and the video games. And I had that job for 12 years. I really enjoyed working with that magazine. But after a while, I just got a little tired, I guess, of covering the same topic. And the magazine industry was not doing so well, especially niche interest magazines like video game magazines. So I decided to try my luck at freelancing, and that's when I started writing for National Geographic, starting with their kids magazine and then their fiction books, or nonfiction books, sorry. And then a couple of years ago, I got offered this series to start writing fiction. So it's kind of a long, twisted path, I guess, to writing a fiction series.
Well, those are the best paths, the ones where you meander here and there and pick up things all along the way. I know quite a few fiction writers who began in journalism, and I always love to ask them what tools or skills they might have picked up from journalism that helps them as a fiction writer. And, everyone says learning to write on deadline is number one. So other than learning to write on deadline, do you feel like your time in journalism has helped you in your present career?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I think a lot of it comes down to just the being an efficient and economic writer and the use of words to really portray your message. Because, with the newspaper and magazine stories, the readers, they don't have a lot of time, and you got a really tight word count, and it's all about, just having really active writing, really active prose, really getting to the meat and not being flowery and going, and I mean flowery is fine, but not like not wasting words, just being a very efficient writer. And also, a lot of times from journalism, you have to be descriptive, especially for features, and just then the skills, just the mechanics of describing things that happen in a way that makes sense in the reader's mind. Writing is like a kind of a telepathy, and that the writer writes something that hopefully the reader then interprets and sees in their brain. So just getting a lot of practice with that sort of thing also is something I took from journalism.
Working with National Geographic on first their kids magazine, and then you've written a whole host of nonfiction books, topical books for them. How tough was it getting in the mindset of that target audience? Middle graders can be a real tough audience. They can smell a fake, a million miles away, and that it's really an interesting, group of folks to write for. What was that like to get into that mindset? And do you have any tips for people writing for this group of readers?
Well, I mean, like you said, that is a really tough group of readers, and they have so many options now for entertainment that coming at them with the book is almost like an extra challenge when they got, the YouTube videos and social media and video games and podcasts and all of that stuff. So, I think it's coming across with it just has to be engaging and entertaining, especially with the characters and the way they talk to each other and the dialogue. And I think that's a major part of it, is just focusing on how the characters speak to each other and making sure that they are consistent to their character type and their personality trait, and they don't do anything that's a character doesn't do something that's suddenly very out of character or doesn't make any sense. But I mean, I think a lot of it just comes from just having this really natural sounding but clever dialogue, and something that is the characters like is funny. You don't want to waste any space, so it's got to be clever and witty dialogue, but also it has to sound natural. So it's a weird mix of like, sometimes it's like characters would never say this. This can only be written down, so you don't want to make it sound like it's all artificial and like too good to be something they would say, but at the same time it has to sound natural and also, you know, clever and you don't want to, especially with young readers, you don't want to waste their time with unnecessary dialogue or scenery or setup or anything.
Right. What was the first?
You know, that might come to. Oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No. I'm finished what you're saying. I'm sorry.
Oh, and I think too that's something that just comes from also working in journalism, is just interviewing people, and you know, you're incorporating a lot of their quotes and citing them in stories. So just, you know, dealing with a lot of people and getting experience with how people talk and act and that kind of thing.
Right. What was the first nonfiction book that you wrote for National Geographic?
It was a book called Everything Castles, and it wasn't a very thick book. It was maybe 60 pages, very heavy on photos. And this was very similar to the kind of writing I did for the magazine, where I would write like a cover story about an otter rescue, or a cover story about a particular the leopard, and just try and engage readers about leopards are cool. This is why leopards are cool. Leopards are very strong. They jump but in ways that the readers understand. A kid reader would understand. Like, you can't just say that a leopard can lift 300 pounds, because there's no real context. So it's more like lift two of your dads, or it could pull the car, something like that. But yeah, so then I wrote a lot of stories for the magazine, and actually that started out just as a tech section too, where I'd write about gadgets. Since I was coming from video games, they figured, well, this guy probably knows about technology, so I would write about gadgets. And then I would ask, I'd tell them I could write about other stuff. So they tried me with a story about wildlife, and they liked it. And then it just kind of went from there. And then whenever they asked, they wanted to do a book about castles that was similar to the coverage of the magazine with a lot of pictures and nuggets, they asked me, and I did that. And that was a lot of fun. And, since then, yeah, I've written about 20 other nonfiction books, some much larger than others. And it just all kinds of topics. The one cool thing about this whole experience is, I think if I ever get on Jeopardy, I'd probably do okay, because I've written all these books. Now, a lot of this information goes in one ear, goes in the eyes, goes on the page, and my brain doesn't retain it. But I'd hope I'd retain enough kind of useless trivia that I would do okay on Jeopardy after 20 general knowledge books for kids.
That's awesome. So what brought you to this fiction series, and not just any fiction, but it's kind of a fantasy series, which harkens back to some of your early loves, I'm sure. But and not just any fantasy, but mythology and these kind of epic stories that we all know. What brought this about?
Well, I mean, once again, it was just all of my work with National Geographic Kids, I've always tried to do the best job I could do. Never burned a bridge. Tried to be Johnny on the spot if they need an author to pitch in. And so, yeah, National Geographic branched into fiction. And my series is actually the second series. They have another series called Explorer Academy that deals, for slightly older readers, it has more to do with adventure and technology. And it's another fun series. And then my editor at National Geographic, Becky Baines, wanted to do like a fun take on Greek mythology that would get kids to stay. They want their readers to stay curious about everything and always be exploring the world. And ways to do that is to kind of wrap up some of these topics like history and mythology in a fun package that has engaging characters. And also before I did work on this series, I did do some writing for video games, actually, like dialogue and scenarios for various like role-playing games and stuff. So I had some experience with that. So I think that my editors just figured that I had some experience kind of dabbling into at least like writing dialogue and fiction, and then they were happy with my writing from the nonfiction, so they decided to give me a shot and came to me with this idea, this world of Zeus in this pet rescue center, and just said, here's the world, here's kind of our general idea, we want you to play with it and create this 7-book series within it. And now, in terms of why they picked Greek mythology, that's more about it's just such a fertile ground for stories. You know, these myths that have started out as songs and poems 2,500 years ago, and they're still the same basic framework that still exists today. Kind of the hero's journey and the battle against impossible odds and help from the supernatural. They're still familiar tales that you still see pop up in, you know, Harry Potter or Star Wars, and it's also just such a fascinating time and place, because that's what ancient Greece was. It wasn't like it was a single country or nation. It was a culture, and it happened in this particular part of the world during this particular span of time, and they kind of shared these same myths, which is how ancient Greeks kind of explained how things worked in the world, and the myths themselves are just so like filled with everything that makes a good story, like these, you know, characters that they squabble with each other and jealousies, and these mortal heroes and monsters and treasures. So it just seemed like it was just a good place to go to start with this kind of fact-based fiction series that the National Geographic was starting.
And you take these timeless stories and make them accessible to a younger audience. And in this book, we've got Zeus the Mighty. He's a hamster, king of the gods, and like you said earlier, there's this pet center at the Mount Olympus Pet Center. Mount Olympus Pet Center. It's a mouthful. In Athens, Georgia. So there's lots of kind of tongue-in-cheek, lots of kind of wink-nod. Tell me a little bit about adapting these timeless stories, but to the sensibilities of a middle grader. What are some of the challenges there and some of the fun things about it?
Well, yeah, I mean, the challenges are definitely that some of the aspects of Greek mythology are definitely not kid-friendly.
Right.
They could get pretty dark, and at times, you know, it seems more like Game of Thrones than Pinky and the Brain. But the general framework, there's enough like fun and imagination, and so that's why I started the series. I based it off the myth of Jason and the Golden Fleas, because that's kind of a witnessed sampler of Greek mythology, and that it has the hero Jason, who's trying to get back his kingdom. He's sent on a quest that has a very specific treasure at the end. He fights harpies, he battles dragons. He travels on a boat to take a perilous quest. The boat's called the Argo. It's a ship that was inspired by the goddess Athena. So there's like these elements to work with. And then within the framework of the Mount Olympus Pet Center, the way that works is, so this pet center is owned by a woman named Artemis, and Artemis is another Greek goddess. She's the protector of animals. But in this world, she owns the pet center. She, A, loves Greek mythology, and B, loves to rescue animals. So when she's working at the pet center, she likes to listen to this podcast that she plays on her phone called Greeking Out, that's hosted by the Oracle of Wi-Fi. She listens to it because she likes Greek mythology, and she figures the animals don't care. She just sees them as her rescued animals. She loves them, and she loves Greek mythology. Now the animals, the Olympian animals, which are her rescue animals that she has named after Greek gods and goddesses, they listen to the Oracle of Wi-Fi, and they believe that she's a real oracle, giving them real lessons and real marching orders and telling them about how the world works. And Zeus, the hamster, who lives on the highest shelf in the pet rescue center, he believes that he is Zeus, the king of the gods. It's not like he's pretending that and this was a conscious decision early on, that these animals really do believe that they are these gods and goddesses, and he sees his hamster habitat on this shelf as his palace. He sees the exercise wheel as his throne, and his water bottle is like his elaborate mirror that he can look into. And he believes that he is on Mount Olympus, the highest mountain in Mount Olympus, or in Greece. So when he looks out from his palace and sees the aquarium section, he sees the Aegean Sea. And when he sees the center, the area in the middle of the aquariums where all the filters and pump equipment are stored, he sees the island of Crete, and he envisions like every isle is a mountain, part of the rugged terrain, and all the other animals that are named after Greek gods are part of his Olympian squad that he's in charge of. So that's kind of how we inject the mythology into this world. So it's funny because at the front of the book there is an overhead map of Mount Olympus Pet Rescue Center that shows the layout of all of this stuff, and it just it looks like a store with the aquariums and the shelves, but they're all labeled what the animals think they are. Like the aquariums are labeled the Aegean Sea. So then if you go to the back of the book, you see an actual map of ancient Greece, and then you see how everything kind of lines up when all is said and done, and how ancient Greece, the geography actually was, so that you can kind of see how things correspond in the imaginations of the animals versus the real mythology.
What's really interesting about these mythological tales and these heroes' journey tales is that, we're talking about stories that are thousands of years old, but there are always new spins you can put on them, dress up the characters a little differently, put them in slightly different settings, but the stories still feel familiar. There's something odd about these stories that resonate with us, this is a story I think I've heard before, whether I've heard it or not. There's just something that resonates with them. As you're writing them, are you thinking about that, about kind of how important these stories are and connecting with a new audience, or are you just having fun with it?
No, that's definitely part of it. It's definitely a matter of, in some ways, so the animals that are in the Pet Rescue Center that believe they're gods, they're the gods from mythology, and in the myths, the gods are the ones that are always messing with the mortal heroes. Like, they try and make life difficult for Hercules or for Jason or Theseus or all these mortal heroes that go out and end up doing all the great deeds and quests. And in the Mount Olympus Pet Center, the mortal heroes don't really exist. It's only the Greek gods and goddesses who end up listening to these tales of the mortal heroes and then become inspired by them. So what happens is they end up portraying their Greek gods and goddess characters, but they're also kind of going through the hero journeys that say Jason and Hercules and the other heroes went through. So they're kind of I'm kind of melding these two personalities of these imperious gods who squabble, but at the same time they also kind of learn some of the lessons that the heroes learned in the mythology. So as Zeus starts the series, Zeus the hamster, he's pretty hard to get along with. He's like he's very much my way or the highway, and he's Zeus, he's king of the gods, but at the same time he's a little hamster, and he has these delusions of competence where he thinks that he knows everything, and honestly he doesn't. He mishears things. A lot of his great ideas are actually terrible. In a lot of ways, he's kind of like Michael Scott from The Office, in that he thinks he's this great boss, but he's really not. And then it comes down to his fellow Olympians sometimes to save him from his own bad ideas. But along the way, he also learns the benefit of like working together with his fellow Olympians. There's Athena, who's a cat, who's the goddess of wisdom, and she kind of is the personality management. She's the HR of the group, and that she makes sure everyone kind of works together and also helps save everyone from Zeus's bad ideas. Then there's Ares, who's a pug. He's named after the god of war, who in mythology is this terrifying force of chaos, who warriors would shout his name as they charged into battle for courage. And that doesn't quite work in a kid's book. So then this, Ares in my book is a pug who just gets into trouble. He's very brave. He charges into trouble, but also can be a source of trouble for the Olympians also. And then, Zeus has a rivalry with Poseidon in mythology, and he has a rivalry with Poseidon the pufferfish in this series. And Poseidon lives in the aquarium. He lives in the Aegean Sea, and he can join the Olympians on their adventures by leaving his aquarium in a little dive helmet that he rolls around in. That's attached by a hose back to his tank. So there's a lot of like stuff that doesn't, it's a lot of poetic license, but we're dealing with animals that go on adventures, and they can understand English. They can understand what Artie, the owner of the pet center, says, and what the Oracle of Wi-Fi says, but she can't understand them. So in that way, it's kind of like Secret Life of Pets, in that there's a certain framework that exists, rules for this world that I have to stick to and be consistent. But then it like opens up the opportunity for a lot of like silly misadventures.
Well, silly, genuinely funny. I enjoyed this book so much. My younger nieces and nephews who I've had over, I've showed it to them, and they just, cracked up, loved it. You said there's going to be 7 in the series. How often are they coming out?
They come out every 6 months. So the next one comes out in March. And, each book is kind of tackles a different myth, and it's going to hit all the standards. It'll have, you'll see Medusa pop up. You'll see the Minotaur in the maze under Crete. You'll see the Trojan War. You'll see the Titans. It's all pretty well plotted out. And as each book comes out, it's going to introduce some new Olympians, because in mythology there were actually 12 Olympian gods who were associated with Mount Olympus, and this story starts out with just 5 of them. So we didn't want to hit readers with too many characters. We want to make sure that there's a kind of a foundation of characters that make sense, and then go from there.
Great. What an excellent book. I know this series is going to be amazing. Crispin, I love it so much. We're going to put links to everything in the show notes and send people to see you and to pick up the book. Is there a place online where people can connect with you if they want to follow along with what's going on?
Well, really, the best place is just ZeusTheMighty.com. You'll find there's a game there inspired by the books. There's also a podcast that's inspired by the podcast from the books. That now you can listen to a real life podcast called Greeking Out with the Oracle of Wi-Fi. So it's just interesting. The books, art has inspired life, I guess.
I love it. Love it. Crispin, we love what you're doing. We're going to send everyone to see you. Thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Oh, of course. It was really fun talking about it. Thanks for having me on.